Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Superintendent Contract Subcommittee meeting. So again, this is just to give us an overview of the process of a superintendent evaluation, and so that we can begin that process. As you know, when we go through this, you'll learn it's a little bit of a longer process, but a thorough process, which is what we want. So before we get started, I'll call the roll to establish a quorum. All right, so I am a yes. Mayor Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Asak?
Yes. Hey, no worries.
Mrs. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Mrs. Sullivan? Yes. Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
And Mr. Minicello. All right, we have a quorum, so we will go ahead with the evening. And let's jump right in. We have Michelle Connors and Carolyn Kopp here to help us, with the overview. And they are old pros at this point. And so we really appreciate having the both of you with us and having your help to make sure that we can, get this done properly. So go ahead.
Keyword being old there. I think, thank you for having us here tonight. I am Carolyn Kopp. I'm actually the dean of the Red House here at Brockton High School. The best house in the school, I will say. That's on camera, right? I just wanted to thank you for letting us be here tonight. Michelle and I have worked for many years together, sort of bringing the district along in the process of educator evaluation. We support not only teachers in the district, but also administrators as they observe and evaluate teachers throughout the district. We also do lend a hand when the superintendent asks us to, in terms of providing you support around the process. So we're going to take you through an overview just tonight briefly, realizing that at the end there are next steps that we have to decide on you have to decide on a committee how you'd like to proceed with those next steps given the timeline and all that is going on currently in the district. In your packet, you'll see the slides for tonight, and you'll also see a more lengthy packet about the process that Michelle will go over towards the end. I'm going to take my glasses off here so I can not get fogged up. As far as evaluating the superintendent, the state determines the overall process. It's a similar process, really, that exists for teachers and educators, and all educators in the Commonwealth. And if you look at the visual here, it starts really with a self-assessment of the superintendent and what he feels he himself in the district needs to be focusing on. It moves into the analysis and goal setting and the plan development, the implementation of the plan, a formative assessment and the evaluation, which happens in the mid-cycle, and then the summative evaluation. It's also important to note that throughout this process, the superintendent determines what a student learning goal, a professional practice goal, and then 2 to 4 district improvement goals that he himself would like to have his team and the district focus on. The performance on each standard, you will talk about this next, is through the DESE Superintendent and District Administration rubric. The Department of Education determines the rubrics by which all educators in the Commonwealth are evaluated. So this rubric on the next, if you see in this next slide, this is the rubric by which the superintendent is evaluated. So what I would like to just point out to you is some of the pieces in the rubric. There are 4 standards by which the superintendent is evaluated. And then there are those goals that we spoke of that are also, that he is held accountable for. So the standards, we gave you a copy of this for your reference so that you can, in all your leisure time, you can look through it and read. But we're going to go into this in greater detail in the packet that Michelle has included for tonight. So when you are actually assessing the superintendent and all that he has accomplished during the year, you will assess his goals based on whether or not he did not meet the goals, whether he made some progress towards the goals, whether he made significant progress, whether he met or exceeded those goals. Now, there is some guidance that the state sets out that Michelle will also go over regarding superintendents within their first 3 years. So the standards are a little, I would say, different, given the fact that the superintendent within the first 3 years is really in an induction type program. So you would keep that in mind in evaluating. So as excellent as the superintendent might be, the idea that he would maybe exceed all of those goals in his first year is unlikely, even as excellent as the superintendent is. The evaluators also provide, as I said before, ratings on the 4 standards and an overall rating. Now, those ratings, for those of you, some of you have gone through this process before for the superintendent, those ratings would be unsatisfactory, needs improvement, and it's really important to point out that a needs improvement isn't bad. We try to convey that to our educators and to our teachers because it's about professional growth, and it's really about determining what are those things that you still need to do better. And in any profession, I think that we would find ourselves in, we would want to be in a constant state of improvement. And that is what we try to get home to our educators in the schools, that it is about a continuous process of improvement, and the same is true for the superintendent. Proficient would be fully satisfactory performance, and exemplary is reserved for performance that exceeds proficient. Now, again, the idea being that within a first 3 years, and this goes for any educator, including the superintendent, that it's unlikely that someone would be exemplary in their first 3 years, and that's actually guidance given by the state themselves. Michelle, feel free if I leave anything out to add here. So we're going to hold off on these next steps just for now, so Michelle can go through the larger packet that you have in front of you, which is really the guidance straight from the state on your obligations in terms of and responsibilities regarding evaluating the superintendent. Michelle.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you all for having us here tonight. We love this stuff. I am smiling behind my mask when I say that. So the first thing I want to tell you is that the superintendent's evaluation process document that I put together for you that's in your packet is a condensed version of over 47 pages that Desi put together. So I tried my best to save you from that. But this is a very thorough, hits all the high points that you as a school committee need to know. On the first page, just a couple of points I want to make. The bottom of that first page is just the same snapshot from the PowerPoint, which is an overview of the rubric, but you also do have a full copy of the rubric that gets into more detail on what each standard is speaking to, as well as the indicators and the elements within those indicators. In the third paragraph on that first page, it does mention the end of cycle summative evaluation report. There is a form that Desi has put together. In the past, for those of you that have sat on this committee when you evaluated Superintendent Smith, we shied away from the form because Superintendent Smith at the time found a PowerPoint with links to evidence worked better. Carrie and I are here to support whatever format you want to use. If you want to use that form, we can work out the technological pieces of that. But just to be aware, I didn't include that specific form, but we can share that with you. It is also on the DESE website. But, Mr. D'Agostino can let us know what you need. If you want that form, we can certainly provide that. One thing that Carrie and I have talked about with Superintendent Thomas in terms of what that end of cycle format would look like is creating possibly a Microsoft form to help you put all of your feedback into one place with your ratings so that Vice Chair D'Agostino can then put it all together and you all can present the superintendent's evaluation. But those are steps to come. So I just, as you're going through this document, wanted to point out you're not missing anything yet in terms of forms. Those are things that we will put together along the way. On page 2, Carrie went through the ratings for you, but this talks specifically about the new superintendents, and Superintendent Thomas is in his first 3 years. So we will walk you through on looking at evidence and rating evidence when the time comes to ensure that it is an unbiased process and that we're looking at quality of evidence as opposed to a judgment of evidence. But I want to specifically point out at the bottom of the page, Carrie mentioned the induction program. Part of the superintendent's induction program is a leadership survey. So when the superintendent is crafting his own professional practice goal, it is advised that he takes the work that he is doing in the superintendent's induction program and results of that survey to inform the development of that professional practice goal. So while the school committee certainly has approval over the goals of the school district and the superintendent's evaluation plan, that is something that he really should craft with your input based on the work that he's doing in the induction program. Page 4 in that document is just a general overview about the whole open meeting process in regards to the superintendent's evaluation. What is open to the public and what is not, and then what is up to your discretion. For example, item number 4, discussing issues relative to the salary. That depends on, in executive session, that's a school committee decision. So just some things to be aware of as we move through the process. Page 5 is the big one. This kind of outlines the school committee responsibilities and the superintendent's responsibilities. First responsibility of both school committee and superintendent is to know and understand the rubric. This rubric was updated in July of 2019, so it is different than, there's some modifications from the rubric that you have used in the past when evaluating superintendents. It outlines what the school committee chair does. The superintendent really bears the weight right now, obviously, of us doing a self-assessment and proposing goals, presenting that to the school committee. Then you all as a collective body decide, are these the goals that we as a district should focus on? And the superintendent and his team working to carry out those goals. Carrie mentioned the formative assessment or evaluation piece. There's no real formal evaluation of the superintendent at the midpoint of the cycle. It's really a progress update that the superintendent should give to the school committee in a public meeting to update you on to here are the goals of the district, here's the progress we're making, are we meeting the benchmarks, are we not, what actions do we need to take to continue to move this work forward. On page 6, this just really gets you into the purpose of the cycle and what those steps are. And this is where we go into this next slide on what we as a school committee, or you as a school committee, excuse me, and we as evaluation specialists need to do to wrap up the 1920 evaluation cycle, which we never really got started, if you will, and then move into the 2021 evaluation cycle for the superintendent. So I'm going to stop there for a minute if you have any questions. I'm going to use my wait time. It's been a little while since I've been in the classroom. Still feels very awkward. I'm going to talk about the 1920 piece. So just to address the 2019-2020 evaluation cycle, Superintendent Thomas was named permanent superintendent in December, developed an entry plan, and COVID hit. So over the course of the last few months, Carrie and I, in working with Mr. D'Agostino and Superintendent Thomas, worked to prepare a presentation for the school committee that basically was in 3 parts. The superintendent's entry plan, the pivot to remote learning as of March 12th, and then plans for reopening school. So we were talking basically from January to July 31st, if you will, in trying to get that ready. And as you well know better than most of us, the DESE guidance kept changing for reopening. So things have been delayed. So what needs to, Carrie and I would recommend that what needs to happen first is we've got to go back and wrap up the 2019-2020 evaluation cycle. So the superintendent has an opportunity to present his entry plan, the work that he and the team did to pivot to remote learning, because I think it's important to really highlight succinctly for our community what was done. Then to talk about the process that went into the reopening plans and the committees. And then summarize, okay, that's where we ended prior to schools opening, if you will, September 1st for teachers. Carrie and I believe that that will be a natural segue then into starting the 2021 evaluation cycle with the reopening of schools and the goals that have been set, which will include, obviously, the district review and other goal items that you feel are appropriate. So that's kind of what we're thinking. There's a lot of steps involved in that, or kind of little pieces to break up, and Carrie and I are here to support you in that process. Just have to let us know what you need that to look like, get some dates on the calendar, and then we can work behind the scenes with Mr. D'Agostino and Superintendent Thomas to put it all together for you to make this a very seamless process and as less time consuming as possible. Any questions, concerns? Okay.
Just one question. How far behind are we? It should have,
So Superintendent Thomas, do you want to speak to what the timeline should be? I know that this is kind of part of your induction program and your contract.
It usually is done by June 30th, but you did work out an agreement with, involved Kevin Bresnahan, where the committee and I agreed to extend it until December 31st of this year. So it has to be done before the end of the calendar year, which I think the Department of Ed won't have a problem with. We just can't go on. We just can't go beyond this calendar year. So it's supposed to be done before the end of the school year, which is June 30th. And that's, I believe, is in my contract. But
It is.
It was mutually agreed with me and the committee that we would extend it based on, obviously, the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, it was with COVID and the reopening committees and everything that went on over the summer. You know, I don't know if everybody recalls, but the superintendent agreed to extend those terms. And it would have put a lot on him and his team to also have to get ready for this, and put a lot on us too, to have to do this in the midst of all of the things that we were working on, that everybody was working on over the summer. So I actually do want to say I really appreciate the superintendent working with us on that, because contractually, you know, he didn't have to, but we really appreciate that. It was definitely mutually beneficial to extend the timeline on this.
To wrap up the 19-20 evaluation cycle, I don't think would take us long. I would say we're probably 80% through kind of the presentation piece of, you know, in working with Mr. D'Agostino, Superintendent Thomas. Carrie and I put together a presentation that just needs to really be finalized. What would be missing, if you will, are the specific concrete pieces of evidence. But you may or may not need those concrete pieces of evidence, because everything that's in that presentation you have lived and been a part of. So if there are things that you need, for example, if the superintendent is making a claim that this goal has been achieved, and you were like, I'm not quite sure, do you have such and such? I'm sure Superintendent Thomas and his team could get that for you. So that's a decision you could make as a body if you want to just kind of say, all right, we really need to wrap up that cycle, and so we can really dig into and plan this cycle in a way that it should be done, so that it's not rushed and crammed as well, and then we just continue to fall further behind. That's a suggestion I think that we would make in trying to put last year's cycle to bed.
I think one of the things about this wrapping up the 1920 cycle is that the superintendent's entry plan isn't or it did not turn out the way that we had hoped the entry plan, or sort of in the way in which the entry plan worked out, our focus and our shifts shifted, and we needed to redirect that focus. So his goals became different. So I think that's a really important point for you to know, is that when we created this presentation, we created it with that in mind, that his plan had shifted because what were his goals were no longer his goals because we went into closure. So I think that's really important to note in this, and that this will be a different way of wrapping up this cycle because of that for that reason, I think.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that Carrie and I had talked about is creating, and I'm going to let Carrie speak to it because this is her creation, is a Microsoft form. Just let you speak to that.
So one of the things, after working on this with Superintendent Smith for a few different cycles, and Mr. Minicello actually knows this, is that, we really struggled to make it the easiest process for all of you, given various levels of technology abilities, but also being really mindful of your time, and really wanting you to have a point where you can have some consensus building, but it can be easy for you to make these determinations. So my suggestion is that we will provide you all of the documentation and all of the evidence that you might need to make a really informed decision, but in entering those, the ratings and determining whether or not the superintendent has met his goals, we would do that in a very clear and concise manner by creating a Microsoft form where if you're familiar with forms, you can use it for surveys, you can use it for a variety of things, but it would allow you to just enter in both how you assess him meeting the goals, but also the ratings and the standards, and then any narrative that you feel needs to be captured with regard to either a standard or an indicator or a piece of evidence. So we would do that so that Mark could then gather all that information together and then come to consensus as a committee. And I think that would be the easiest way to have everyone with varying abilities and time to fill out the same information and get it to you in a timely fashion.
So would this be, basically, it'd be an electronic version of the form that
Right.
we would complete
Correct.
instead,
So-
online, or?
Yep, and it would come to you, we would craft it. It's in the works right now, we would craft it, and then it would come to you for review so that you can make sure it is gonna work the way you want it to work. And then what we would ask is everyone completes those forms, that information comes to you, it's then exported into an Excel spreadsheet so that then you can tally essentially what those ratings are and have that as it's evidence-based because it's what people put in as their ratings. And then you would make your final determinations that way.
I mean, would that work for everybody? That sounds like the best. Mr. Minicello?
Yeah, in terms of clarification, so the new members know how it will operate. The superintendent's contract outlines the different compensation that will be rewarded or awarded when you compare the results of our surveys with the scale that it's incorporated into that contract. So our survey will basically have the formula, or it will be set up to correspond with his contract. So when the numbers are calculated, it will then correspond to percentages. How much of a percentage will the superintendent receive, based on obviously our answers and responses. So there's that piece that you have. What we're doing then translates into the scale and compensation that's in the superintendent's contract. I think that maybe it would have been a little bit easier if we had been provided with a copy of the contract so that you could see it tonight. That's what I always did as vice chair, but when you're not consulted on these things, you don't do that. So I'm just kidding, Marky Mark. So, but the next meeting Mark will have the contract, and that way we can have the contract. And actually, it's probably better that we don't have it because we can get an example of how it worked last time, and then you can. Then tonight's basically information, understanding it, and then the next meeting probably should have the examples of how it will be set up, and then we can translate it and show how it all works. So it's not. It seems it's more overwhelming because it's like, well, not for you because you're an educator. You're used to these, all these edu-speak terms. That's what I call them, edu-speak, you know? So, for normal people, for non-school people, civilians, you know, we don't deal with this edu-speak. And, you know, it takes a little bit of time, but it'll work out. It always does every year. We do it every year, and it works eventually.
Well, thank you. That covers what I had under, for other business after the presenters were done, but, so, anyway,
I would say next steps then is as a committee, as a subcommittee, you just want to think about what do you need next and what is our role in that? Obviously, crafting of the form and sharing that with you is a preview. You might want to see that with that example of the contract, the superintendent's contract, or the way the ratings play out. You just, like I said, just let us know what you need. We're a little pressed for time during the day. It's a little busy as school administrators right now, for some reason, a little busier than normal. So just let us know, you know, give us a little bit of time. We don't need, it's not like we need a month, but
right.
a week or, 10 days would be wonderful. The other thing I forgot to mention is that in the past, when we worked with Superintendent Smith, when she and her team created her goals, we thought it best to connect the goals to those standards so that you could see the interplay as opposed to goals separate from standards and indicators. And that's how we also guide our administrators and our teachers to craft their own evaluation plans. It just helps you see the full picture. You do still have to provide separate ratings for goals and separate ratings for standards, but it makes it easier when you're looking at it just in these larger chunks as opposed to bits and pieces everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense if we just go ahead that way,
Yeah.
you know.
And to speak to Mr. Minicello's point, I also wouldn't want you all to get overwhelmed with the rubric as a whole, because it does have a lot of standards, elements, indicators within the rubric, and it is never expected of any educator, including the superintendent, that they are meeting every single element within the rubric. It is the department, even in their guidance, asks you to look at the standards as a whole and not focus on every element and indicator within the rubric. So keep that in mind as you digest the rubric, to not get super focused on all of those little pieces of the rubric. Okay?
Great. Yep, Ms. Asak.
Thank you. So in the past, I think the last contract review we had done, they gave us like a thumb drive with a lot of the information for us, like the evidence to review. I could be wrong. Was it last year that we got that? It just made it easier to be able to review things.
Yes, that was the evidence that the superintendent and her team put together. She put it all on a thumb drive. I think in the 2021 evaluation cycle, that's certainly a process. I think Carrie and I would recommend you use Teams, but that's just us.
Okay.
Because it's shareable, and everybody can be in it at once, but we will do whatever works best for the committee. I don't know that that's something you would need for the 1920 cycle, just because of the timeliness, to try for the superintendent and his team to try and get all of that evidence together. I think, but that's your call.
Okay.
I think 2021, yes, absolutely.
No, perfect. I'm just not familiar with Teams. So if someone can just walk me, if you have like a.
We're all learning.
Walk us, yeah. If you can just walk, I know I'm gonna need a little bit of assistance with Teams until I get familiar with it. So, I can always make arrangements.
We can do, whatever works best. A thumb drive is fine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I can get, I mean, as obviously as evidence I can get you the minutes of the reopening committee, the agendas. I can obviously produce the application we put in for Brockton High School which is one of the goals of the
Yep.
renovation, the Huntington School. There's several other things. I mean, there's quick things I can get my hands
Yep.
on, I
Yeah,
can
so
make sure.
I think if you wanted to meet with us.
Yes.
To look at that PowerPoint that we put together,
Yep.
Superintendent Thomas, and then you can see what are some pieces that you would need to pull that maybe the school committee wasn't right in the midst of.
Yes.
that You would want to
Yep.
share.
Right. And
That would
those,
be great, yeah.
Yep. And those pieces of evidence also, it's enough often to have them listed or bulleted rather than actually going through the documents themselves, because often they're very lengthy. So you may just want to be reminded that, oh, right, this is the piece of evidence, just because there are so many things that come across your agendas and so on and so forth. So I think to just have that bulleted list of things that the superintendent would determine as pieces of evidence to meet that standard, I think is probably sufficient in a lot of cases, and then you could request additional documents if you need them.
I think that would be perfect in my situation. It's just, we do cover a lot, and sometimes we forget. And we do cover such a, a lot of information throughout the year. So that bullet point, if you can just a refresher, just to remind us things, especially things that were early in the year. I'm good with that.
Yeah, and then if there's something you want to actually see in more depth from that list, it might be best then to pull it on an as-needed basis, similar to, I think, what you do with your agenda items at the beginning of a meeting. You pull some things out to discuss, you have your list there, but you pull some things out that you want to look deeper into. I think that would help to be your process for the evidence as well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, any other questions? All right. So what do you need from us at this point to move forward with your next steps? Just want to make sure I'm clear on where.
Go ahead.
I think the date for your next meeting and what you want to accomplish at that next meeting,
Okay.
so that we are clear on the work that we need to get done in preparation for that, and that we ensure that we get it to you, obviously prior to, not at the meeting.
That would be ideal, thank you.
Yes.
In the meantime, I can share a draft with you of the Microsoft form, just that I'm thinking of,
Yeah,
that would
that would
be
be awesome.
helpful, so that you could then, give me some feedback on whether or not you think it's going to be practical or not. But it's very simply laid out, and I think it goes sequentially. It would lend itself well to just capturing that information, but you might have other thoughts on that, so,
Great.
okay?
All right, thank you
All right, great.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you both, appreciate it. Thank you.
So, as was already explained, we'll all individually evaluate, and then those come to me. And then I'll compile that, and then we will meet again to review the compiled version of the evaluation. And then, the final part of it. And the document does become a public document. This process is public. There were questions earlier at the beginning of the meeting about, is this a public meeting? Is this not? It is. Actually, they included some information for us on that. If we went into discussions of salary issues, then we can go into executive session as long as it's part of a contract negotiation. Basically, this process is open for the public, and with that exception. For anybody who doesn't have it, Melinda, can we make sure we get copies of the contract to everybody? I think most of us probably were a part of its negotiation and agreeing to it. However, I'm not sure, Cynthia and Tony, if you were. No, I think that came before. Yeah, okay. So the two of you may not have seen that before. Yes, Ms. Asak.
So, Mr. DiAgostino, so the deadline for you to file the completed contract review is by December 31st. When is our deadline to get everything to you?
Great question. Before December 31st. And I would like to have my part of this done well before December 31st. I think, again, I had told you all I wanted to delay this till we get school open and get things a little more settled. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was leaning towards, because then, yeah, I mean, I would.
Because we still need to review that as a
Right.
group, so maybe end of
And you
October?
get into the holidays.
Yeah, December's a tough month.
Yeah, I would rather see it done at least a full month before, so I mean, you know, I want it, so I'd say I'd like my piece of it finished and the final draft of it done before Thanksgiving. That would be what I'm shooting for. So, I mean,
But
really.
Friday, November 20th is the Friday before.
Before
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving? All right, and so if we want this process completed before we get into December, and everybody's gonna have their various, well, I don't know if we'll have holidays, but let's assume we will. October 15th, is that too short? No, that's a month from now. That might be a little short. I'm just trying to think of,
Because we have to at least get a couple of meetings. in.
yeah. All right,
About right after election, October 13th, November 13th, to get everything to you. So
I
maybe
have
everything to you by
everything.
November 6th, then we can.
yeah, you know what, let's do November 6th. I am comfortable that if I have everything by November 6th, that I can have everything ready for us to finish this before the Thanksgiving holiday. Because that would be my goal, is let's finish this before, then we get into December, and it's such a funny month with everybody doing different things that it'll be tough to have, get these meetings.
I'm sorry, what are we agreeing on for November 6th?
So
what-
November
what's
6th,
expected
all
from
of
us?
you will have your evaluations completed.
Okay,
Your individual evaluations will be completed by November 6th. And then that's when I will get all of yours, as well as, having my own having been done the same way. And then I have to do my work to consolidate those.
so this useful evidence, like the minutes, materials, agendas, or like, for example, talks about the student learning, the MCAS student growth percentile. Where do we get all this information? Do we ourselves have to reach out?
No,
to-
this will all be provided.
Okay,
So the evidence is provided. Usually we get, US thumb drives or links to, what we need. And where it's a Microsoft document, I don't know if they can just put a link in the document.
Yeah, they'll have to.
We'll have to see if maybe we can just link right to it.
We
If
can work
that's,
with Ethan on that.
if that's, that'd probably be the easiest way, is you're reviewing this, part of it, and here's the evidence. It opens right up for you if that's possible. But we don't have to go requesting that and searching for it. That's provided for us. Can we, Mike, do you think it's, to give the committee time to do its work, individually, you think it's realistic to say that, you and your team, everything's ready for us for the 16th of October?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay? Is everybody comfortable? It only gives you guys about 2 weeks. Do you want more time? Is that okay with everybody? Is that, so basically,
If we
the
need,
16th,
As long as we have the tool,
yeah, everything's got to be ready for the committee no later than the 16th so that we can begin individually doing our work. The tool,
the
the
evaluation,
evidence.
the actual, forms to use.
Yeah, all the, everything, the actual evaluation, evidence and documents. And the goals, right. So all of that would have to be ready for the committee by the 16th of October. Gives everybody basically 2 weeks to do what everybody needs to do individually. Then that will give me just about 2 weeks to do what I need to do. And then we can get meetings scheduled to have the formal review. Okay. Does that work for everybody?
and we have time if we need like an extra few days. We have plenty of time, right?
Right. And normally there's a lot of flexibility and this, because, people let's just say that in the past, evaluations have been done late, turned in late, and so that's the one thing I will say, because we are already late, we really need to stick to these deadlines as best we can to keep this moving and get this completed. But as we go, for our new members, as we go, if you have questions, call me and ask me. That's part of my role as the vice chair to, help everybody with this and who needs it, and having 2 new members, I'm certainly available to you as you're going through it. If you have questions while you're looking it over, you guys know how to get a hold of me. Don't hesitate to call.
If he's tied up, you can call any of us.
Yeah, Michelle and Carrie, you can email them,
Once you have like the goals and the contract, then in the rubric which you write on, it's not as confusing as all these papers make it seem. Once you have the goals and you have the evidence and everything, it's not as confusing as, it seems really confusing with all the papers, but it's not as confusing once you see everything. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it sounds a lot worse than it is. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is confusing, the papers.
Yeah.
But once you have everything like in
Once you
pieces,
see it.
you can write,
Yeah.
you see the goal, then you know what the superintendent's done. You've been watching them since you've been elected, or we've been watching them for 6 years because we've been working with them that long. However long you're elected, so you know the things that they've been doing, So it all kind of comes back to you,
Yeah.
We're agreeing that by November 16th, everybody individually brings their individual evaluations to them assessed together? Is that what we're-
October 16th. Well, oh, yeah, November 6th.
Yeah.
November 6th is everybody's deadline to have their evaluation done. And then, like I said, that gives me about 2 weeks to do my work on that and then present it, So the superintendent and his team will be ready with everything. And I'll work with them, obviously, to make sure the tool's available and all of that. They're going to send me the working copy that they have. So that would be October 16th would be the deadline for everything to be ready for the committee to start doing your thing, Any other comment, question, concern on this matter? Is there any other business to come before the contract subcommittee? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
All right, and we will call the roll on the motion to adjourn. Mayor Sullivan
Yes.
and Vice Chair DeAgostino is a yes. Mrs. Azak,
Yes.
Mrs. Mendez, Mr. Minicello.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez. Mrs. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
All right, did we have a second to adjourn?
Me.
Okay,
There's Judy.
I second.
you did. Okay, thank you. All right, we are adjourned.